Hey guys, Cameron here. Today I want to show you guys MockU. I did a video before and I kind of skipped over it, showed you guys a little bit what you could do, but I just wanted to make a video to show all the other stuff that you can do with MockU. So what I have here is I have an interface. We've got some various stuff here. We'll go through each one of them. And then I just set up a quick MSTest project and grabbed all that and threw it all in there. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is we have a mock object. So that's the first thing that we'll look at. So the mock object is typed. Um, and the way that I always the first thing that I have to decide when I'm making a mock, this is how I make it over here. So I'll stop highlighting stuff, by the way. um, so this mock here, it can be either strict or loose. And so the difference is that strict will not allow a call that has not been set up to be made without throwing an exception. So that means that if your code calls the mock object and you haven't set that up in your test, then what's going to end up happening is it's going to throw an exception right there. It'll blow up halfway through the test. There's loose. And what loose will do is it will kind of accept anything. It will return the defaults if it needs to return anything, and it will return immediately from anything where any methods that return void. So it just kind of just accepts anything unless you've set it up. Then it will follow your instructions. So that's the first kind of thing that you have to think about when you're starting a MockU unit test and setting your stuff up. Okay, so the next thing that I typically am going to end up doing is I'll go into my mock object. So we can just explore those properties a little bit. So the ones here that I use are object, and so that's the way to access the object for this mock. So it uses a bunch of dynamics, I believe, in the background, although I could be mistaken on that. But it creates this object for you, and .object will actually return the instance of an object. So you can't pass your mock into anything. So if that's kind of confusing you ever, you got a red underline, you can't figure out why this isn't going in, .object will allow you to pass it into stuff. The other one that I use is setup and set. So setup get is pretty easy. I usually use setup for that, but you can use setup get or setup set. But those are the ones that I'm using. More often than not. So those are the ones that you need to know. So the first thing we'll do then is we'll go over setup. So setup takes an expression of type action of type my object. Basically what this is going to do is you're going to have to pass in, I use a lambda function, but you're going to have to pass in an expression tree, and that expression is going to represent the methods that you're going to call or that are going to be called on this mock object. So I use lambda expressions. I use s for my setups. And so, okay, s dot. Now s is an my object. So now we can access, using IntelliSense, all of the methods, all of the parameter lists, everything like that. And it's going to do a bunch of design time kind of compilation checks, I guess, and let you know if anything's wrong right off the bat. So a compile time error, that was the term I was looking for. So here we go. Now the most basic thing that you're going to call is no parameters, and it returns void. So DoWork. So that right there would set up a setup. It would give you a setup for the DoWork on this mock object. So that's about as simple as it does. Now, if you're in strict, this will make sure that all the calls to s.doWork, and s, whatever your variable is, but the doWork function is going to pass if you're on strict. If you're on loose, this code here right now wouldn't really do much. It would behave the exact same way. Now, one thing that setup does do is it returns an setup of type my object. And so if we go ahead and pull up IntelliSense, we see there's a bunch of stuff that we can do with these setups. So you can do a callback, and that's going to call some code. You can do raise an exception. You can raise an event. Throw an exception. And you can also mark it as verifiable. So when we get into verification later, this is one way to do it, and I'll show you another way later. So the setup for that, something that simple, is just exactly that. Now the DoWork, and actually, you know what? I'm going to add another one here. I'll show you guys what happens when we'll call it DoWork 2. Horrible name, but what are you going to do? If you go to DoWork 2, you'll see now that we have our returns. So this you can just return whatever you want. So you can set it to be a string or run some code and return something. So very, very flexible. One thing that MockU does do is basically lets you run a bunch of code wherever you want for verification and all the various steps of this. So you can do a setup, you can compare parameter values. So if we had let's see, we'll make another one here. V is for value. If we had this here, we took this off, we can use another class called the it class. This is a class that MockU gives us, and we can say is or is any. So is any is typed, so you can just say, for example, any string. Boom, right there. You can just say any string. So with MockU, there's one easy way, like we saw before, and then there's also one more advanced way. So you can do dot returns. You can just throw anything in there. In fact, you don't even need this it does is any. If you want to specify a single value, you could say there. So it's very, very simple. But then they also have the way where you can use code. And so the it.is, now this, once again, takes an expression. So if you're doing an is check, you can see that this here is actually a, oh, whoops, forgot my type. It'll try to figure it out. So if you specify your type in the first part of your lambda expression there, in your parameter list, then it will infer the types. But unless you, if you don't, then you have to specify it here. But then you have a string here, and you can do whatever you want. You can say, whoops. So that's kind of how you would. There's two ways to verify the same parameter. But I mean, inside here, you can also run a bunch of code. I mean, it's a lambda expression. You can throw entire methods in there. So that's what happens if you're accepting values. If you're returning values, we can set the returns. We already saw that. So let's go on to our next, my DoWork async. So one thing that I use a lot in my application is a lot of async calls for my databases, for my database calls, for my gets. And so if we take a asynchronous method, for example, oh, whoops, that's why. There we go. We can just say, well, it's going to be any action of string. I believe that's correct. Oh, bool. Okay. There we go. So I can say, well, accept anything. And again, this wouldn't do much if we were in loose mode, which I do want to be in. But once you go dot, you can do a callback. So this is where I use most of my callback stuff. And so all you do is you just have to specify a parameter list here. In this case, I don't actually have to because there's only one parameter. But if you are passing in a callback and you're passing in, for example, like a string or an ID or something like that, then you might need a separate parameter list. No, can't even be inferred anyway. Okay. There we go. So passes in an action of bool. So here we go. And there we go. And now we have our callback. So we can, there we go. So that right there, taking our parameter, which is a piece of code, and then executing that code, we can pass in our fake values here. So that's when I'm mocking out my database. I usually use a repository pattern in my current project to kind of create a layer at least that I can throw in a bunch of mock objects. And so that's how I would return a value from a database. And I mean, it's super fast for your tests and everything like that. So that's the way that I do it. So one of the other things that I guess that async there is more of a tip really than anything else. But another tip that I have is when I was trying to do a setter, I found that the normal setup method will work for a getter just fine. But for a setter, it actually tries to get the value before it can set it, or something along those lines. Anyway, what ended up happening is that it just blows up on you if you're using strict mode. So what we can do is to set up, right? Now that right there is going to call a getter on that. And so what we can do, right, okay, sorry. Had a brain fart there, forgot what I was doing. Okay, so right, so if we go set up like this, and we say, oh, well, we'll just assign a variable, there we go, now we've set this up. I just do not know what I'm doing here.